In Anuj, is Vivek here as yet, or still we are waiting for him?
He's here.
He's here. Okay. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and good morning, various parts of the world. Thank you for joining us today. This is an idea exchange roundtable on shaping global dynamics, expectations from the new U.S. administration. And as I was sort of thinking about our interaction today, and I thought let's reflect on an interesting thought. History often unfolds in cycles, economic, political, social, industrial age, Marx. Uh, some of us have been through the hippie era. So are we at an inflection phase now? Does the return of the Trump administration signal a potential recalibration of how nations engage in what we feel is a increasingly fragmented world? From my experience of last 2 decades in global geopolitics and about 6 years of residence in the United States in Washington, D.C., uh, I feel U.S. presidents hold greater importance for the rest of the world, much more for Americans themselves. Past administrations have brought in their own touch, but not lost touch with continuity and to global issues, but clearly not so now. And the question just isn't what Trump 2.0 means for America, but rather what it feels like or is going to be for the rest of the world. So will the U.S. shift from being a collaborative superpower to a self-interested negotiator? And if so, will other countries diversify economic partnerships, have strong regional tie-ups of their own, and regionalism will come in? Or will the U.S. deal making be strong enough to drive them to making whatever negotiations are required? But I think undeniably the rules of the game are changing, and in the background of the recent détente between Russia and China, mixed responses from the Arab Street to the Gaza events, one feels that this shift isn't temporary, and therefore this is raising a fundamental question. Can a superpower prioritize itself while maintaining global leadership? Now, these are questions for business leaders, diplomats, strategists in every corner of the globe and in the room today. And thank you so much for being here. I think the next 4 years appear important shapers of global narrative for many decades to come. So I hope that over this next an hour or so when we are meeting, we'll hear from you distinguished minds on defense, trade, technology. Our goal isn't to predict the future, but to sort of chart potential pathways that the emerging world order could take and how we can realign these changing realities. And so thank you once again for being here today for this discussion. I request my colleague Neeraj, let the hostilities begin.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sandhu, for setting the context for this very important topic. I would also like to thank this stellar set of panelists that includes Mr. Vivek Lall, who is the Chief Executive of General Atomics Global Corporation. And we have with us Mr. Vinay Singh, Managing Director, Primus Partners, who was also the former CFO and Chief AI Officer for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And we have with us Caroline Freund, who is the Dean of UC San Diego School of Global Policy, and she was also the Chief Economist for World Bank previously. We also have with us Mr. Neal Patel. He is a political advisor and managing partner for Patel Partners. Then we have Mr. Gopal Nadadur, who is the Senior Vice President of the Asia Group. And we have Ms. Akanksha Ray, who is Senior Manager for AI and Digital Trust, Intel Corporation. Welcome, all of you. We expect this to be a very interesting evening discussing the return of Mr. Donald Trump, a very aggressive leader, and who passed about 100 executive orders on day one. And what he has been saying during his election campaign, and it has actually created a kind of tension across the world because he's very aggressive. And of course, most of the businesses across the world, not just in the United States of America, will have to have a strategy that allows them to navigate in an environment where the global order is changing, and it's actually a multipolar world now with China, Russia, India are also laying their claim on being a superpower. US on its side, they are expecting reciprocity, the theory, the concept of reciprocity for helping out any country or company in the world. So my first question, I would like to begin with Mr. Vivek Lall. Mr. Lall, you are in the defense manufacturing and defense supply system. India, US enjoy very good defense ties. If you just look at even the previous government, several defense equipment, weapon system were promised to India. However, now with the theory of reciprocity being tied by the Donald Trump regime, the US administration, how do you think it is going to impact Indo-US ties, especially when India has constantly emphasized upon its right to purchase weapon system from anywhere in the world, be it Europe or Russia, depending upon its self-interest?
Thank you, Neeraj. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah, we can.
I'm joining from Washington, D.C., and thanks to Primus Partners for this opportunity to engage in this discussion. Great to see friends like Ambassador Sandhu and Caroline. So thank you for the opportunity. It's a good question. However, I do think there's enough U.S.-India momentum over multiple administrations in the last several years, where I think that relationship is going to continue to grow and foster. I think if you look at the bucket of stakeholders involved, and namely, in my mind, there are 6 buckets of stakeholders. One is the political spectrum on both sides. The other is the bureaucratic spectrum. The third is the industry folks. The fourth is academic. The fifth is the communications and the perception through laid out through the years. And finally, the end users on both sides. And if you look at all these stakeholder groups, you'll see that there has been great forward momentum in the US-India defense relationship. I do not expect anything but acceleration in that. I expect that there will be continued growth and fostering, and predominantly that is because of common shared interest. I think there's some elements as the geopolitics plays out around the world that require the oldest and the largest democracies to continue to work together, and that to in a coordinated and an increased fashion. As you know, there have been several foundational agreements signed between the two countries. The trade numbers in defense are 25 billion plus. There's more interoperability in training. There's a potential of interchangeability in the future. There's joint R&D now being done. There's a lot of workforce development. And I would say that the following 6 aspects is what the future holds in terms of defense globally, but certainly in the bilateral context. One is persistent ISR. I think given the geopolitics, deterrence is very important, and that can be achieved through persistent ISR. The second thing, as we have observed in some of the current conflicts, is deliver mass numbers. In other words, loitering munitions, etc. The third thing I'd point out is logistical dominance. And I think this is something that both countries, of course, can continue to work together on. One often overlooked thing is how do you correlate petabytes of data into real-time common operating picture? And I think the US and India can lead that among like-minded nations and continue to do so. The aspect of electronic warfare is becoming increasingly important, and I think, again, there, India and the US can lead. And then finally, I would say elements like big data and cloud computing, again, inherent strengths of both countries, and I think this will continue to grow. So if you look at all these aspects, I think the relationship is very robust on the US-India defense stream, and it will continue to grow.
Mr. Lal, coming to the economics of defense ties, since the new US administration focuses upon reshoring to the United States, where manufacturing companies, especially like yours, the US administration will now expect less and less of offshoring. And this is likely to increase the cost for all the manufacturers. Now, countries like India, or for that matter, any other country where US has been supplying weapons, they are very cost conscious. So how, as a company, you think the manufacturing companies will deal with this expected cost escalation? And will it not make other global defense manufacturers more competitive compared to countries operating out of the US?
I think in industry, and I talked about these 5 or 6 stakeholder buckets, everyone is very cost conscious. Just in a particular.
Dr. Lal, your voice is a little feeble.
Yeah.
Okay, can you?
Yeah, it's better. Yeah, it's better.
Okay. I think cost is, of course, an issue around the globe, and budget constraints will be there in every country, especially when it comes to defense versus other sectors of the economy. However, there's got to be national prioritization, which continuously occurs. And I think that is part of the strength of the US-India relationship, is that you can have frugal innovation, you can have, by collaborating, you can address the needs of both the US side as well as the Indian side in terms of technology. And technology transfer is not only, by the way, one way. There's a huge startup ecosystem now in India that has come up over the last several years, which provides great technological benefits to both countries. And I think it is a mutual relationship where there's more synergies that would drive down costs for both countries. And so I do not think it is an either-or situation. I do think that when you peel the onion and get into the details of the supply chains and how the aerospace and defense ecosystem works, one rapidly realizes that there will be some priority programs on both sides, but by synergizing interests, it does actually help both countries.
Right. I will move on to now Mr. Vinay Singh, Managing Partner, Primes Partners. Mr. Singh, given Donald Trump's focus on deregulation, how do you think can the US lead global AI governance while prioritizing its competitive edge?
Yeah, great question. I would start by just setting the tone, saying public-private partnership. And I say that having 2.5 years under Obama in international trade and 2.5 years recently focusing on AI and CFO. And why I say that is, although the recent executive order 14110 on AI was rescinded and a new one put in place, the heart of the old executive order was values to impact. And I think why that's important here is because we have those shared values already with India and the US and other countries in the world. We share things like a common need for fairness, bias reduction. And so regardless of what is to come, what I even told my team as recently as last week, we've built a framework like many agencies have at the Department of Housing, but that framework puts us in a position to get ready to accelerate. I said, regardless of what administration comes in, AI is in a place where it will accelerate. So just like Stargate that was announced, the $100 billion committed with no government funds, up to $500 billion. These are bold bets bringing in the private sector players. And so I really stress, I think the future lies with this public-private partnership, building on prior agreements with the governments, as well as the deep ties that industry already has. One area to look out for, though, I will say, common to US, India, and other countries, is really the rapid regulation environment at the state level. That's what's holding it back. So even with Stargate, announced in Texas has already put out some AI regulation. There's federal regulation. So there's still a lot more to come. It's very sparse what has been announced thus far. But I see this only with artificial intelligence. The only way to move forward is truly all in. And that requires all players, government players, workforces, private sector. So that's my view.
Mr. Singh, one more question. Like, what opportunities, according to you, does Trump's proposed tax reforms create for U.S.-India partnership in emerging tech sector?
Yeah, the emerging tech sector, like I said, there's so much. I've been in the space for over 20 years, and it's a natural, organic relationship that the technology companies have. Obviously, California is riddled with a lot of startups. There's a lot of Indian, diaspora involved in that, and I think as Mr. Lal had mentioned, that deepening of that industry relationship will continue just organically.
Right. I would like to now move on to Ms. Caroline Freund. Caroline, Mr. Trump has put all the multilateral institutions on a notice period. Basically, he's not a big fan of multilateralism. He believes that it's rather bilateral treaties that can help U.S. strike better deals, and he has actually questioned the whole idea of even World Bank and all the multilateral institutions that have been the part of the Washington consensus, and also they have actually supported the United States of America's supremacy across the world. As someone who was chief economist at World Bank in the past, how do you think this is going to impact the idea of globalization?
Well, I think that the Trump administration has made pretty clear that trade and globalization will go in a different direction. Let me start by just saying it's really a pleasure to be here. And at UC San Diego, at the School of Global Policy and Strategy, we recently started the 21st Century India Center and are very focused on U.S.-India relations. But in the first Trump administration, what we saw was really hefty tariffs on China, 25% on over 60% of trade. And that led to a huge reshaping of trade. China's share of US imports fell from about 22% before those tariffs to 14% now. So really, what took more than 10 years to go up took 5 years to go down. So really, tariffs are effective at reshaping trade. But overall, the US trade deficit remained, trade shifted to other partners. And that's where I would say there are opportunities for other countries. India received some of that trade from US. Mexico and Vietnam did a little bit better. So that is going to continue, and we're going to see this kind of fragmentation that we've seen in the past. So the multilateral institutions, I think, need to either be restructured or rethought. They've become decreasingly relevant in the world. I'd say the WTO, probably more than any institution, has seen its value fall. And the question that this session started with, can a superpower prioritize itself while remaining a leader, I think is exactly the right question. So how does this work? Are we going to go into a world where China leads one bloc and US leads another bloc? Or is this all about deal making and Trump is using threats to make deals? We saw that yesterday with Colombia and the threat of tariffs to take immigrants back, and it worked. So it'll certainly work with small countries, but what happens between US and China remains the big question. And that's where I think India is just so critical as the large balancing power in Asia.
Yeah, so Caroline, if you just look at this this perspective that it was globalization that held the world together, and countries like India, who are now representative of the global South, they all expected some sort of a support system from the United States of America to be on the side of democracies, because you have seen India is the only democracy in this part of the world. We have seen so many military coups in Pakistan. Recently, we saw something in Bangladesh. But the reason India has survived for the last 75 years is because because India continuously saw that that alignment with democracies of the world. Even though we were on the side of Soviet Russia pre-liberalization, It was actually the idea of liberalization that allowed India to come on the side of the United States. However, now with the changing world order, don't you think that countries like India and other countries in the global south, they might feel tempted to maybe just rethink their strategy if they believe that US is just not able to take care of their interests?
Yeah, I think that's a huge concern. And there's kind of an old trope that China goes to the global south and delivers a bridge and US delivers a lecture. And I think now there's even more of a concern that what direction is the US going to go in? But at the same time, I think US and India share a lot of common interests and similar threats, and really stand for the same values. So with respect to US and India, there's so much to be gained from working together. And this is a period of unique opportunity for developing that relationship, I think. India is not a target of this administration. And if you think about the most critical relationship right now is US China, I think the second most critical one, whether it's India China or India US, India is in there. And India, if India can improve its business climate, lower its tariffs, India maybe form a trade agreement with the US, you could imagine that relationship really developing further. So I think there is a danger of some countries, especially those that have benefited significantly from Chinese funds, kind of shifting into that realm. For India, I just think this is an opportunity for US-India relations that I hope both countries take advantage of, because there's so much to be gained there.
Right. I'll now move on to Mr. Neal Patel. Mr. Patel, can I see him on the screen? Hello, Neal.
How are you?
Yeah, good. Neal, my question to you is that, just like India, Mr. Trump is just trying to renegotiate his deal in terms of the aid he provides to different countries and different institutions. Of course, the United States has been competing with China for its foothold in Africa and other parts of the world. If US retreats or becomes very transactional in its approach while dealing with Africa, which may not have much to offer to the US administration immediately, don't you think that it will give access to China, which has already in the last 10 to 15 years managed to create a sort of a hold in the African region?
I think you're right, and I think you're seeing that unfold right now with regard to the U.S.-China the relations. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we may have said it was a Cold War. Now it's open warfare. There are committees on Capitol Hill that members of Congress are now saying the U.S.-China Select Committee. I don't know if you saw over the weekend, the CIA thinks the COVID virus was actually a lab mishap. These official statements are things that are coming out in real time. Does that create a vacuum? Perhaps it does. But then you also have to look at the tail end of this. Companies like Huawei coming in are not always the best use for countries to utilize. They come in for free. But if it's free, as we all know, nothing in life is free. And the Chinese do get to exercise both soft power and hard power that way. And I think, as we discuss things, especially on the AI front, 2024 was all about artificial intelligence. I think for this particular focus, AI might also mean the America-India relationship. Prime Minister Modi also discussed this when he came to speak to the joint session. And I don't know if you saw only 7 days ago, it was a week ago, Mr. Jaishankar was front and center at the inauguration. The Ambanis were in attendance. President Trump loved to have the market cap of that room increase, and the Ambanis have a seat at the table for that. But if you look at the way that the U.S.-India relationship will be, and especially with the Trump 2.0, the partnerships are going to be more bilateral rather than regional. Trump has come out and said, hey, look, I want to figure out how to make these trade deficits into trade surpluses. And I believe the question that was posed earlier was, can a superpower prioritize itself while remaining a leader? You're seeing the Republican Party in America fight that amongst each other. Mitch McConnell says we want to lead on Ukraine and Russia. Donald Trump says, no, we don't. And that's just within the Republican Party. And there's an ongoing effort there within the party to figure out how do we posture and what do we do. You saw last week also a mention of the 100 executive orders. Most of those were quite domestic. Almost all of them were. President Trump feels he was elected and the Republican Party felt like they were put into power. Remember, they got the House, the Senate, and the White House. Clean sweep. Why? Because they said they were focused on domestic issues, federal spending, the border, which India over the weekend said we'll take back 18,000 of our Indian citizens. And oh, by the way, we'll discuss about the tech visas. We know you want to discuss that. So I think that common ground is something that Americans care about, and I think that's something that the Trump administration cares about. If you saw what Secretary of State Rubio did on day one, he met with members of the Quad, Japan, Australia, and India, because those strategic countries are placed in parts of the world where America doesn't have many friends. And I think Caroline said this earlier about, we're having trade deals. Look at the Saudis. They are surrounded by unfriendly nations toward the U.S., and they're getting $100 billion defense bilateral agreements during the first Trump administration. And President Trump is saying, good, I'm glad you did that. But now I'm back in power. I want you to announce that you're going to give us more investment here. We talked about Starlink. The Saudis said they'd do an $80 billion deal. And President Trump said, nope, we want to round it up to 100. So I think there are a lot of things going on there. And then also, I'm a big believer in, look, policy and personnel go hand in hand. I don't know if any of you have heard of a company called Palantir or PayPal, but the founder of that's called Peter Thiel. One of his acolytes is named Michael Kratsios. He was the chief technology officer in the first Trump administration. He's now head of the Office of Science and Technology and Policy at the White House. So you're going to be able to see a lot of this. And again, in Trump 45, I think it was open warfare to say, we'll nail China. And everybody was okay because that populism wasn't something that Republicans embraced. Tariffs were a word that Republicans, Paul Ryan, and all the members in 2017 were saying, whoa, 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 this isn't my brand of Republican. 8 years later, the Republican Party has shifted, and the balance has also shifted, where we saw over the weekend, Colombia was threatened with tariffs. And again, the difference between 2025 when Trump comes into office and 2017, back then there were low interest rates in 2017. The economy was actually ready to get unleashed. You're dealing with, a deregulatory state that many people were unsure of. Now, all of a sudden, Trump is trying to teeter and balance the trade wars that I will press the button, I'm ready to go, versus the economy falling apart. He does not want anything to do with the economic recovery. You're seeing him press his thumb a little bit more on the Federal Reserve to say, lower the interest rates. A little bit more forceful than potentially he has in the past. And again, if globalization, I think Neeraj, you said, if globalization is what held the world together, I think Mr. Trump comes in office feeling, yeah, but guess what? NATO, pay your dues. We're tired of being the police of the world. It's time for the rest of the world to help us. And I think you're seeing a new age of populism that wasn't always embraced by not just Republicans, but by Americans in general. Because now even the Democratic Party, I don't know over the weekend if you saw, but Gavin Newsom, liberal California, probably the most um, outspoken critic of Donald Trump, was on the tarmac waiting for him to come off of Air Force One because, not necessarily because he likes him, because it's good politics. Now that could change, but President Trump has some wind in his sails right now that he's taking advantage of while the Democrats are still in a little bit of disarray, strictly on the political front. However, there are some Democrats who are saying, on this immigration stuff, in terms of domestic closing the southern border, I can get behind that, as evidenced by the Lake and Riley Act last week. So Trump is actually hitting a few moments in his stride right now. Can that last forever? Probably not. This is U.S. politics and politics in general. But his friendship with Modi, it goes back very far. More so, I think, than anything, as opposed to the policy, the simple fact that how Mr. Modi came into power. He consolidated. He was a social media star. He made sure he got his message out, and he's charismatic. The big bear hugs, all of that. Trump knows Modi is good TV as well. And I think during the diaspora, I think there was during the visit for the Howdy Modi, Trump said he's the only guy that can sell out stadiums faster than I can. And I think there's a genuine mutual respect there that I think India can take advantage of.
All right, Neil, one more question, because you just mentioned that, within the Republican camp, there is a debate between, what Trump proposes and what some of the Republicans believe in. One of the biggest point of contention has been the H-1B visa. If you just look at what Trump has been saying in its MAGA policy, let's make America great again, because his job is to actually generate jobs for Americans, who are American citizens, and he believes that all these visas and illegal immigrants, they have taken away the jobs of the legal Americans who have built America. Even though there is a dispute, because I think the liberals have always believed that America has been built by everyone, including the illegal migrants to that country. But in that sense, I would like to just point out to what Mr. Elon Musk, who is a very important man for Trump, he's willing to go to war to get more and more H-1B visa workers to build his space company and for his mission to Mars, because he believes that America, whatever it is today, would not have been possible without the liberal immigration laws. So how do you think it can impact? Do you think that India and in government needs to fare, because India, a large part of its economy runs on repatriation from the expats, people, engineers, or high and individuals who go and who have been actually the CEOs of global tech companies. So how do you see this debate developing within the Republican camp?
I think that some of within the camp, again, this goes to the simple fact that the Republican Party is not a uniform party. And you're seeing this. I think it was over Christmas time that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy found themselves on the other side of the complete far right on this particular topic. I don't believe that you're going to have a debate where Americans are going to tell you we're going to be the electrical engineers, the software engineers. It's just not happening. The numbers and the data aren't there. The question is, how do you balance it? It's funny because this exact thought is what I was thinking about when I saw Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai, and all of these tech CEOs at the inauguration. I don't know if they were playing catch up to Elon Musk or if they were saying, we're here. We need help and we need brain power. And that's not coming from internally. How do we increase that number? I think that goes back into a fight with the Congress. And here in Washington, that message has to be carried out. However, again, this brand of populism that is only true for Trump, it appears, seems to be where you can embrace big tech and somehow say, okay, get them what they need, while at the same time, we're going to get the president what he needs. I think that's an open debate right now. And I think a lot of them, members of Congress, are, especially those in areas that are, in the Pacific Northwest, Silicon Valley, the Research Triangle Park, those Republicans are telling you, no, we need more. We don't have the capacity. Our companies, our American innovation, we're losing the war on quantum computing if we don't get more brain power here. That message has to be beaten out. But again, in Washington, it takes 5 years before something actually starts to catch fire. And unfortunately, it's slow and steady drumbeat. Although I do think that Elon Musk is probably one of the better people in the world to get your point across because of his platform and how he uses it. So we'll see if that yields any fruit. Mr. Musk's time in Trump's inner orbit, I'm not sure how long that's going to be either. That in and of itself is a different relationship. But I do believe that, especially as we move forward and we're seeing how big tech is involving so many things. Look at us today. We would not have been able to be involved together and meet together without it. More Americans are using it on a day-to-day basis, and so that vilifying of big tech is starting to ebb a little bit, I believe. So we'll see, but I don't have an answer for you because those numbers have to be decided by the Congress and then passed. And Congress can't even pass a bill right now to keep the government funded. So, that one's probably on the lower list of priorities. However, it is, again, through the second or third iteration of this discussion that's been going on for a long, long time.
All right. I would like to now move on to Mr. Gopal Nadadur. Hello, Gopal.
Hi, Neeraj. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
Hi. So, Gopal, my question to you is, in the interest of India and US in South Asia, where we are competing with Chinese interests, it's very important that United States helps India maintain its control in this region. However, if you just see in the last few years, India has not managed to keep those ties. If you just remember, just before the Bangladesh elections last year, the government of India had to make a statement saying that Bangladesh is a very important country to maintain peace and stability in this region. And in the name of maintaining free and fair elections in Bangladesh, the US should not interfere in that process. And we actually, because the Sheikh Hasina regime had actually helped maintain peace in this region, but soon after the elections, I think within few months, Sheikh Hasina lost power in the country in military coup. How do you think that the US and India can revive their hold in this region? Because anything that happens to India in this region with regards to its relation with its neighbors, it directly helps China.
Thanks, Neeraj. So India and the US undoubtedly share concerns about China's influence in South Asia, like you say, and beyond South Asia. We have to take a step back and see how that influence has come about, right? Firstly, we could argue partly the influence was bought by infrastructure fueled by unsustainable debt, as some of my speakers have already covered earlier. There are examples of civilian commercial infrastructure that was also has the potential for use for security purposes by China or espionage. For example, the science ship that docked in the Sri Lankan port. There are similar concerns in the Maldives, for instance. So that's part of it. We must, however, also acknowledge that some of China's influence was also because of each South Asian country pursuing its own interest, and in some ways looking to balance different powers. Every country pursues its interests and forms partnerships where helpful. The US, is where America first, make America great again is the latest manifestation, but that sentiment has always been around. India with strategic autonomy, with Atmanirbharta. So India's neighbors are also, as far as their domestic political circumstances might permit, they too try within their means to pursue their interests. So now, to your question, Neeraj, how India and the US could offer some solutions here. Well, we could start by paying really close attention to the domestic politics and the interests of each of India's neighbors. There's a hunger for economic development, for infrastructure, and for job creation. This much we can all agree upon. How can India and the US help? And not help by offering the kinds of financing that China did, financing that's not sustainable, and it's frankly not politically feasible for either the United States or India right now. I don't think either government is going to cut a huge check for another country, given the need for that funding domestically. And even China, to be honest, is concerned about rising levels of unsustainable debt on its books now, right? So that's not a solution. What are the other solutions? Can both countries, can the United States and India enable growth and jobs in other ways in India's neighbors? For instance, would there be opportunities for more trade and commerce? I'm not just talking about trade with the US, I'm even talking about intra-regional trade between India and India's neighbors in BIMSTEC, for instance. Would there be more market access in some sectors so that other South Asian countries have skin in the game in India's economic growth and vice versa, in addition to skin in the game in the US's standpoint in the world? Could there be more interweaving of supply chains, more integration, mutual dependence at healthy levels? Could there be some support for infrastructure development, especially if it enables greater trade and connectivity? So Bangladesh and India have for quite a few years now been looking at rail connectivity, linking India's northeast to India's mainland, so to speak, to Bangladesh, which would transform regional commerce and trade in the region. So could opportunities like that be pursued, which would be a win-win? And then finally, another big area is digital economies and economies of the future. Bangladesh is trying to digitize. It's trying to increase economic diversification. Garments exports are still 60% of the country's share in exports. How can India and the United States offer innovations and solutions that could, enable Bangladesh's road down digitization and digital economic growth? And similarly for Sri Lanka, for Nepal, for the Maldives, for other neighbors. So perhaps those kinds of solutions could bring these countries closer and working together, and essentially lead to mutual wins.
Yeah, Gopal, but as you mentioned that, India can have those regional ties with trade and commerce between India and Bangladesh, India and Nepal and all. But all these things were true till a few years back. If when government that supported India was in power, but now with the new Bangladeshi government in power, the kind of statements that are coming from the radical groups who are supporting the Muhammad Yunus government in Bangladesh, how do you think it places India? Because if we just look at all the deals that were signed in the past, be it Adani's electricity deal and all these deals, they have been facing some sort of a question mark. And do you think that US should, through some backdoor negotiations, help India in stabilizing its position in this region, because it is stabilized because of its neighbors who are hostile to India? American interests get compromised against China in this region, especially the South China Sea.
Look, I mean, what happens in backdoors, we can certainly speculate upon what could happen or not. What I'd like to look at as a successful case study, though, is the Maldives. We saw how there were elections in the Maldives, the presidential elections, with a very vocal, visible anti-India platform and a pro-China platform. It could not have been more visible and apparent than that. Of course, the Maldivian president came to power and immediately demanded that Indian troops leave the Maldives. We saw the Lakshadweep incidents, the rhetoric around that time. So very, very hostile downward trajectory for relations. Look where we are now, right? The Maldivian president attended Prime Minister Modi's swearing in. Both sides have stabilized the relationship. You could argue that it's on an upward trajectory again. So if we were to apply a similar trajectory to Bangladesh, your question, Neeraj, what I would suggest is that we not react to the ongoing rhetoric and jump to respond to every single statement that's made. Instead, I think Indian diplomacy outdid itself with the Maldives, and I think set a template that could be adopted. It's not going to be quick with Bangladesh. Bangladesh obviously has its own domestic politics to figure out. A lot of the statements that are made, a lot of the rhetoric are about domestic politics. So it'll take time for that to be figured out. We might see elections in Bangladesh later this year. And if so, we'll have to wait and see how those elections go. And continue engaging. I think the Indian Foreign Secretary has been engaging very visibly. There have been, positive statements made by leaders on both sides. So it's all about engaging through this period of troubles, of difficulty, and seeing if we can find an upward trajectory going forward. So, let's not jump to conclusions. And beyond this rough phase, when things are once again in an upward trajectory, all those solutions that I listed could be on the radar. Bangladesh wants these kinds of solutions too. This is not just for India's or the US's gain. It would help whichever government is in power in Bangladesh. It needs to be structured as a win-win opportunity.
All right, Gopal, since you mentioned the word strategic autonomy, it's a very popular word. It's a very popular word in India these days. We just, Outlook Business did a cover story called Chasing Tech Sovereignty, because strategic autonomy is also about tech autonomy. And the government of India has been actually trying to make India a product nation where it is not just the consumer of technology, but also an IP holder, something which has not been the case in all these years. In fact, if you just look at where India stands in the value chain, it's very, low down the order. But from here on, India wants to have its own IPs and all. So I would like to ask the same question to you as well as Akanksha, who represents Intel Corporation over here. Akanksha, India has its mission to have that tech sovereignty, where it wants to have control over the technology that it is using. Because most of our chips are coming from China. They're designed by companies like Intel and NVIDIA, but these chips are being manufactured in China, and India now wants to have control over the value chain, so that incidents like what happened in Lebanon during Israel-Lebanon war do not happen. But if you just look at the recent a statement issued by the government of United States, I think India has been put. This was the last rule passed by the Biden administration, where India has been put in the second tier countries for exports of advanced GPUs. Now, this jeopardizes India's AI missions, or the missions of tech sovereignty. So this question is for both Gopal and Akanksha. How do you think United States can help India in deal with this situation? Because India has its own ambition of achieving that thing, because we cannot be relying forever on the United States and a situation where we are just not able to compete with China in case of a war. And modern day wars would not be just fought with missiles and aeroplanes, or those fighter crafts. They would be communication wars, and GPUs are a very important tool in that segment. We can begin with Akanksha.
Sure. Thanks so much, Neeraj, and thanks for inviting me to speak alongside these excellent panelists. To your question, it's a really good point. And when that rule came out from the Biden administration, our team was hard at work, kind of dissecting the impacts. There were quite a few surprises there, right? India included, but Israel was on that list, even EU countries that, are big partners to us and very strategic to, the global AI landscape, such as Poland. And other countries were also included in that list of tier 2 countries. And so, what we're seeing is the U.S. government trying to balance priorities with, allyship to promote an AI ecosystem that is strategically able to counter China's influence, but also this own kind of, feeling of protectionism, right? And trying to assess, okay, where all are the vulnerabilities? And so I think a key thing we're going to see with the Trump administration is a reassessment of some of this. And of course, there is the threat of, heightening some of these positions. I think it will be interesting and very important for a country like India, which is a very strategic partner in the, U.S.-China competition, to position itself and make it very clear that it is a partner of trust and security that the U.S. can depend on, right? And reposition itself that way. I'll let Gopal add.
All right, Gopal.
Thanks, Akanksha. I'd just follow and add that, maybe taking a step back. So the US is a vital partner to India in so many realms. It's security, it's trade, it's technology, it's capital flows, people to people, as, panelists have already said. So, this the export control topic, we could look at as a piece in the broader mix. And so when it comes to the United States and India reaching, a comfort zone on this issue, there is probably going to be a need to talk about the other issues as well. There is probably going to be a need to place this within the context of market access. Mr. Trump would love to see a trade deal happen. Can a mini trade deal happen, as the panelists mentioned earlier? If so, what could be on it? Part of what could be in a trade deal that could make Mr. Trump happy is probably more energy exports, more crude oil and natural gas, which India needs more of. Maybe nuclear exports. Speaking of high technology, there could be some manufactured goods. There could be some digital service exchange. There could be some conversation on visas, as has been covered already. And within all of this, then we can talk about export controls and where that fits in. So if it's a discussion about an overall package deal that's appealing enough to both sides, perhaps we'll have a greater chance of meeting in a mutually beneficial middle.
All right. Now I would like to open the floor for certain questions that can be answered by anyone. In fact, anyone can take this attempt. So, taking cue from what Gopal said, that India's interests lie in energy security, where the Trump regime can help India import nuclear technology or nuclear fuel and other sorts of fuel. But at the same time, I would say that all these years, India has really upped its game on the sustainability front, because if you just look at COP28, COP29, even COP27, Prime Minister Narendra Modi made huge promises, and India is actually doing a great job in making its businesses sustainable. But that sustainability comes at a cost, and all these years, India was actually looking forward to technology transfer as well as some sort of funding from the G7 nations, including the United States. But at the moment, Mr. Trump, he doesn't believe in climate change, and he believes the famous phrase goes, drill, baby, drill, which means, drill as much oil as you can to make America great again. But this actually goes against the movement that has begun in India, because if there is no technology transfer, or for that matter, there is a signal that sustainability does not matter. How do you think countries like India, or in this region, the global South, which had come together negotiating at COP conference, should deal with this signaling by the Trump administration? We can begin with Vinay.
Sure. My quick response, again, is it's going to be the private sector. So if it's going to be transactional, it may not be led by public policy. As you heard Neal talk about, public policy is a bit tangled, having to deal with congressional policies. So I think the private sector is actually going to lead here, regardless of public policy.
All right. Neal?
I think Neal had to jump off for childcare.
Okay, so Carolyn.
I'm sorry, can you repeat exactly the question?
So Trump administration does not believe in financing climate change, in stopping climate change by financing the green technologies for the world. However, if you just look at India's interest, because even the pollution levels in India have really shot through the roof, and especially during summers, it's difficult to breathe in the northern part of India. And India has actually set very aggressive targets to become to promote sustainable businesses, beat our BRSR norms and everything related to business. But now that the Trump regime is actually signaling that we need not focus so much on climate change, rather we should only focus on growth. What kind of strategy should countries like India have at a time when our interests are actually aligned with a sustainable growth of the world as well as economies, whereas the most powerful country in the world is saying that let's just focus on growth? Do you think that India in the coming years will have to say goodbye to its sustainable stance, because India is actually finding it very difficult to finance its sustainable policies, because Indian businesses do not have that kind of money to green their supply chains? So what kind of impact will it have in this part of the world with regards to its energy usage, the kind of energy it uses, be it fossil fuel or the renewable energy?
Yeah, I think this is a really tough one, because with climate issues, you need the whole world to participate, because if one country raises the price of carbon and really goes all in, it actually reduces the price of energy and fuel for the rest of the world, who then uses more. So it continues in terms of emissions. So, but that said, I think it's time for India and other countries to step up. I think while India has made some commitments, I think those commitments are, far off and not that that clearly implemented or checked. So I think it's time for other countries to step up. This is an area over the next 4 years where the US is not going to lead around climate. I think it's a chance for Europe who really cares about this issue to step up. But at the same time, there are a lot of technologies that are making renewables cheaper that will continue to push us in that direction, as well as, fusion is on the horizon. So I don't think it's the end of shifting away, but it will be, unfortunately, a time when other countries, including India, actually have to take the lead on this issue and maybe exchange it for other issues the US really cares about, or this administration, because I think there are a lot of people in the US who do care about climate, but clearly Trump is focused more on growth and prices and less on renewables.
Yeah, so Neal, do you think it would be really possible for countries like India and the global south to sustain or to carry the burden of a sustainable GDP growth rate, Neal, without any kind of help from the developed nations?
I think Neil stepped off.
Okay, all right. So maybe Akanksha can take this question.
Yeah, sorry, repeat that part of it again.
So as Caroline said that, now the responsibility comes upon countries like India to push themselves on the sustainable growth path. However, my question to you is that given the kind of, challenges that India faces in terms of arranging green finances, do you think with this kind of signaling from the US administration that they are not going to fund you for sustainable growth, they are not going to support any of your green financing programs, do you think it would be really possible for India and other global south countries to fend for themselves in the next 4 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, following on to kind of what Carolyn said and also Vinay, I think there's a stakeholder spectrum here, the US government being one, but a really critical player is going to also be industry leadership, right, in the private sector. And private sector is signaling, I believe, counter to, of course, Trump's drill baby drill comments, that there is a need and an interest in sustainability, innovation, and practices. And there will be support for, players like India and countries in the global south to continue to innovate and take on those risks. I think there is a market opportunity for that supports some of that innovation. And we're seeing that, in the semiconductor space, that, these high-tech developments require sustainable practices in water renewables and other aspects of, energy provision. And so I think, there's a lot of learning and benefit there. And then, there's other areas in the kind of energy industrial supply chain where I think India will be able to play a bigger and bigger role, such as the, critical mineral space. The Mineral Security Partnership, which India is a part of, is still going to be a priority, I believe, for the upcoming administration, with, economic security being an invaluable pillar of national security, and that is a focus of the Trump administration. I think, in the US-China context, figuring out how we can decrease our dependence on China for critical minerals on all parts of our supply chain, including the energy supply chain, will be a role that India can really take on and show where sustainability intersects with innovation.
All right. I would like to go back to, is Mr. Lall there?
I don't see Vivek.
No, I think Lal had to shift to some other meeting. So
all right. So I'll come back to Caroline. Caroline, institutions like the WTO are now struggling to resolve disputes and enforce rules amid rising protectionism. Does it signify the end of a rule-based trading system as we know it? And what innovative reforms or alternative mechanisms could fill this vacuum, ensuring global trade remains fair, transparent, and effective?
Yeah, the WTO is in a very difficult period right now. It's an institution that is focused on maintaining the low tariffs as well as negotiating new agreements, and the negotiating arm has certainly not done much in recent years or even decades. And then in terms of maintaining low tariffs, there was a heyday during the global financial crisis when there was a feeling of the incentive is to raise tariffs to shift demand to oneself as in the aftermath of that. But it didn't happen. And the WTO and the G7 sort of kept everyone together. I think we're past that now. Once you open the national security as a reason for tariffs, as Trump did in his first term, you lose the ability to maintain current stability in the trade system. So I think we're definitely shifting to a kind of bipolar world where we'll have the China trade group and the US trade group, unless an agreement can be made between US and China. Again, though, Trump is not interested in multilateralism. He likes bilateral agreements. He likes deals. And he likes renegotiating deals. He already renegotiated NAFTA, and now he wants to reopen that again with tariffs on Mexico and Canada. So I just see the WTO as pretty irrelevant in the current circumstances. And let me just give an anecdote that last winter, they couldn't keep the heat on because they didn't have enough funds for that, even though they got money back because of COVID and the absence of travel. Maybe this was actually 2 winters ago. And the countries voted not to allow them to keep that money to keep the heat on. So we have an organization that literally was where the people were freezed out.
All right. Now I would like to take some of the questions from our audiences. Mr. Sandhu, this question is for you. This question says, what could be the contours and economic potential of India-US free trade agreement? Currently, there is no such agreement. Will Trump administration prioritize this move?
So there have been some conversation around leveraging the FTAs that even the United States has with a number of other partners across the globe and becoming part of that. The contours will remain a little unclear till we have firm signals on how President Trump wants to move forward. But there is a tremendous possibility of exchange of competencies and goods and services on both sides. I mean, it's one way to look at to say that India is in tier 2, but fact of the matter is that all the GPU suppliers, including NVIDIA, Intel, and AMD, have their global capability centers in Bangalore and Hyderabad that are actually designing the chips. So there may not be a capacity to actually build a 2nm or 3nm wafer, but there is a capacity to design that. So I think there are complementarities here that both countries have to discover and take forward. I'm not very sanguine at this stage that there can be an FTA between the two countries, but clearly a conversation on how to improve trade. And let's face the fact. I mean, in global conversations of this kind, there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. It's what you want to do on that particular day. There's an issue that you both want to solve, and you both negotiate and come and arrive at an agreement. As you yourself said about Maldives, or even what India and China were talking maybe 3 years ago, is not for the situation today. So I think things change. The good part is, as some of us have highlighted earlier, I mean, if I look at the map of the world and you move westward from India, there is literally no democracy right till you reach the Atlantic Ocean. And Caroline, you were chief economist at MENA, and I was at that time, I was part of the ED office, the India ED office. I was senior advisor to ED. And that was something that used to strike us. There is such a swath of world which is non-democratic. And if the voices of these two people within the two peoples, I should say, within the United States and India, that I think will bring about a conversation that brings them both together. I would also like to flag another issue that you just mentioned about the Indian and the US influence in South Asia, and the sort of importance of the, not the elephant, but the dragon in the room, which is China. In 2005, I attended the SAARC summit as part of my Prime Minister's delegation, Indian Prime Minister's delegation in Dhaka. That SAARC summit was held in the China-Bangladesh Friendship Center. It's an irony. So that's the kind of importance that needs to be placed here, both by China, both by India and United States, in taking forward their relationship. Let's not face the fact that there is only one ocean in the world that's named after a country, and that's the Indian Ocean. And that's a huge swath of geoeconomic need, for want of a better word, to control in the interest of the world. So I think I don't see an FTA developing in these 4 years, but I do hope that complementarities on various supply chains, both goods and services, will find a better conversation moving forward. Back to you, Neeraj.
All right. I would like to go back to Gopal. Gopal, there is one more question from our audience. It says the recent push by countries like those from the Gulf to join BRICS or align with China's Belt and Road Initiative signals a broader realignment in trade alliances. How do you view this as a counterweight to Western-dominated frameworks like G7 or the OECD? Are we seeing the emergence of a parallel global order, and what are its likely implications for economic stability?
Yeah, Neeraj, I thought your earlier point at the start of this panel was a great one, which is about multipolarity. So I'll go back to that and perhaps add flexible multipolarity, because I've just read an article about it. It's not made an impression. And the idea being, let's not overly simplify the situation and say certain, countries are just going to choose certain blocks. If we look at countries in South Asia, if we look at countries in Southeast Asia, they tend to choose different groupings for different issues and interests. So this, certain countries looking to join BRICS could be for certain reasons, but at the same time, some of those countries might also be part of I2U2. Some of those countries might also be part of other groupings, not alliances, not formal treaty alliances or anything, but they choose to join different groupings for different things. And so I think that's the way we'll probably see the world evolve over the next few years, maybe decades, which is a move away from, of course, the unipolarity, perhaps a move away from bipolarity as well that we saw during the Cold War. And it'll be, of course, two major power centers, but a whole host of other centers as well, and very flexible, fluid grouping. So I think when it comes to BRICS in particular, to Ramakrishnan's question, I mean, India's membership of the BRICS isn't because it's meant to be, anti-West. It's just meant to be Northwest, right? And so it's not. And in fact, India acts as a moderating influence within BRICS. And in certain statements, negotiations by the BRICS, where Russia and China have pushed to extreme language, India has been the one to say, no, let's tone it down. And so, India is not in the BRICS for the same reason as China and Russia are. And my point is, different countries choose different groupings for different reasons. So I'll just leave it at that.
All right. So one question for everyone. This is something that I've been pondering over for many years now in India, being a business journalist, that one of the biggest challenges that India has faced in attracting foreign direct investment and, providing the ease of doing business over the years is its inability to stick to the laws, the business laws. For example, India introduced something called retrospective tax in I think 2011 and 12, and after that even the new regime could not change it, and this has gone against the interests of India, because if a country is just not able to stick to the laws that it implements and it just retrospectively changes it, it creates a kind of a doubt in the minds of investors, and most of the economists have said this thing in India. US, on the other hand, for all these years, its capitalism and globalization has stuck to the laws that were created, and it has all. That's the reason I would say that US dollar is so powerful in the world, because everyone knows that US does not change its policies overnight. But now with the Trump administration coming in, he's been undoing a lot of things with regards to globalization and so many other things. So don't you think that this actually puts the US power in, it puts a question mark on the kind of environment that US will provide to businesses in its country? Hello.
Would you like to answer that?
All of you. You can begin with Mr. Sandhu, and then Caroline, and then Gopal, and then Akanksha.
Oh, I stepped onto it. Yeah. So the way I see it, finally, I think that's a good question to raise. And first about the Indian part, and so I was at the Prime Minister's office when Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee made that retrospective taxation issue. And if you remember, there was a lot of pushback within the Indian system itself, both economic as well as policy-making circles. Most of the regulators, like even the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, and the Central Bank, were not happy about it. And while you cannot take away constitutionally the right of a sovereign to take a retrospective action, but there is a consensus within my understanding of the consensus within the Indian policy-making circles, that is not a step that is being taken, though it remains on the books. Neeraj, as you know, I mean, no precipitated action has been taken around that in that sense. So it's sort of remaining there as a sovereign right. Nothing is sort of implemented on that side. But I also agree with you, and I think that's something that all of us need to consider. Conversations like, for example, around the Panama Canal, or sort of trying to rewrite history in many ways, economic history in many ways. Those issues is something that I believe will, at some point of time, hurt the US. But I also believe that this is more rhetoric. This is political rhetoric. I think President Trump also understands, and his team also understands, that if this kind of non-adherence to a global rule-based order is implemented, it does impact the United States' own standing. So I will wait for actions to really flow out. But my understanding at this stage is this is the political rhetoric of talking to your own supporters. But it's not something serious. I think the United States remains committed to following a rule-based order. It wants to rewrite some part of the multilateral space, and perhaps there is some logic in saying also fund your own growth and things like that. But I think we will have to wait to really become judgmental on that. I'm optimistic that the United States will remain the same force in global business that it has been.
All right, Caroline, your views on this?
Yeah, I think it's exactly the right question. Again, it's about the self-interest versus leadership, which requires thinking about the world together and trade-offs. And I think the concern is the US has become an unreliable partner if it commits to deals and then backs out, whether that deal is NAFTA, whether that deal is the Paris Accord, whether it's the global tax deal. But how can you make a deal with a country that can have a different leadership in a few years and then change the terms of that deal? So I think that's the big concern. At the same time, there's really no alternative right now. So you need, for business, you need simplicity, you need speed, you need predictability, and the US is still the best game in town. There's just no alternative, and it's the same with the dollar. You can talk about having a competing currency, but you need to have open capital markets, and there's no other country that has that kind of stability, open capital markets, and predictability. So I think US is still the best game in town, but there are big questions about how much the interests are going to be in the world versus the US. And maybe one could imagine other powers rising to take that challenge. But I don't see anyone right now even close to the US.
All right, Gopal?
Neeraj, I think Nader is in a hurry, and Nader, you are a significant voice in the UAE. Nader is a Primus leader in UAE, former CEO of KPMG in the Lower Gulf for many years, and very well conversant with the entire Gulf and its relationship with the world. Now, your thoughts on some of the things that we've been discussing. I know you're in a hurry, so I thought let me request Neeraj to give you time. We can't hear you, Nader. Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm trying. For some reason, I'm getting cut off. Hello.
We can hear you now.
Okay, fantastic. Look, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for a really great session. We're in a GCC countries. We're enjoying a much more and a better relationship with the Trump administration. In fact, a lot of countries in the GCC, they were looking forward for this relationship. And we look for the stability that the US will bring. But also in relation to the relationship with India, a significant part of our talent here is in the region relies on India, and also on the technology that comes from India and from the US. So we are more on a consuming end right now. And I think for us, this will offer a great opportunity for a better buying power. It's been also mentioned that the environment may not be the hottest topic at the US administration right now. And I think it was mentioned once in Davos last week, where the years before it was everyday topic. And many of the GCC countries are, as you well know, oil-producing countries. So here we might witness and also an uptick in our oil and gas trades on that matter. However, I want to emphasize that here in the UAE, there is a very strong emphasis on continuing with the agenda, the ESG agenda and the environmental agenda. The puzzle here for us is really the geopolitical area in the regions, and our concerns are primarily around what's happening in the entire regions from Syria to Yemen to Iran and what's happening. But again, we're looking forward to a good and strong relationship with the US. I think it was interesting what Mr. Trump said last week in the news debate that he had with His Highness Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi. He asked for 500 million. The Saudi prince offers 600 million. And the debate started, just rounded off to a trillion. That's a 40%, 35% increase, as if we're talking a small chunk of money. So again, I think we're very optimistic about the new administration, the relationship. We enjoy a very good relationship with India. We enjoy a good relationship with the US. I think it's going to continue to prosper and bring more opportunities here for us. I don't think we have as much of a challenges as we do, like India might have on that front, but also a tremendous amount of opportunity. That's really my 2 cents on this, Neeraj.
Yeah, Nadir, one more question for you from my side, because West Asia has been a very volatile region for past more than a decade now. Wars, irrespective of whether the Republicans are in power or conservative Democrats are in power, they have continued in this region. And US has participated in those, even though Donald Trump, when he came to power, he said, even before coming to power, he said that he will try to achieve peace in this region. And I think what's happening between Israel and Hamas, he has tried to keep his promise. Even before taking over, he announced that he's just trying to ensure that there is a peace deal brokered. But do you really think that the next 4 years, be it because of this very aggressive behavior, because of the aggressive behavior of Donald Trump, countries involved in the bloodshed would try to control themselves? Because unlike other US presidents, Trump only believes in the interests of the US, and he seems to have realized that wars are not helping US economy much, and he needs to actually withdraw from various parts of the world just to focus all American energies towards China, because if he continues to be engaged in the Gulf as well as other parts of the world, especially Ukraine, Russia, its energies would be divided, and perhaps the biggest beneficiary of those wars would actually be China. So, what's your take on this?
Wow, this is how much time you have? A couple of hours. This is a big question because I have to rewind 80 years to wars and instabilities in the Middle East. It's not really just the past decade with, where social media allowed us to hear and know almost on a minute by minute basis. So the conflict in the Middle East has been going on since 1945, 47, 48, and it continued growing, but we hear more about it. Look, my take on the Trump administration and the promise he made that he'll stop the war is very positive, to be honest with you. Even if he achieved 50% of the peace that he speaks about, I think the world needs some peace, at least for the next 10 years. And where I get my optimism, because even in 2017 or 18, he was able to push the Abraham Accord and bring very old antagonized relationships between some part of the Middle East and Israel, and actually brought that relationship to a halfway decent trade right now and communication. And I think in the next 10 years, it'll be a lot better than the past 10 years. So yes, I am optimistic about the Trump administration being able to push in one way or the other one of the points of peace agreements. In the Middle East here, particularly in the UAE, we've always balanced this relationship. And it's actually interesting because during the Biden administration, you find that we built very strong relationship, as always, historically, with the US, but we started to build stronger relationship with Russia and China. And yes, the UAE and Saudi now are part of the BRICS. And but look, I am optimistic for the next 4 years. I think Donald Trump will make a difference. I think we're starting to see that with early discussions, with potential meeting with Russians, and also potential new conversations with the Iranian, putting back the Iranian from a lot of countries, stopping the Red Sea challenges with Yemen. And that he's only been in office for actually literally 7 days, 10 days, 20 days, less than that. So, and actually the Lebanese elections of a president after 2 years of having that. So if I answer your questions, I am optimistic for the Middle East for the next 4 years. I think the trades of hostages in the past few days is also a positive sign. It's never easy. The Middle East will never be easy. If we have a 10 years of break from conflicts, I think the Middle East will be very prosperous. And yes, last year, I think we've heard MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, saying the Middle East is planning to become the future Europe in the next 30 years. And I think we're starting to see that development. So look, the Middle East is really a different place for any of you who have not been here for quite some time. It's really a different place. Saudi is leading the region economically, politically, and now socially become a fantastic theater for how you change a country of 38 million, which is huge, that used to be very conservative. So I'll stop right here because I can go on and on about the Middle East. But again, we enjoy good relationship with most of the world, most of the Western world, India, China, and that's the politics here in this part of the world. You know, we try not to have a major conflict with the bigger power, economically and politically.
All right, Nalit, thank you very much for this response. I think we are just about to enter the last leg of this discussion. One question that I would like to ask Akanksha, there's a lot of focus on digital public infrastructure in the global south. India is taking lead in that. How can, according to you, the US can collaborate with countries like India to take leadership in creating digital public infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. A good one. I think the roots of successful digital public infrastructure are trust and in its adoption. I think that's going to necessitate a few things. First of all, collaboration on workforce development, which Gopal had mentioned earlier, is something that the US and India have been collaborating on a lot. And I think the key to that is public-private partnerships. So continuing to facilitate and support that as kind of a forum for establishing a clear vision for what trustworthy digital public infrastructure looks like, and a vision that prioritizes transparency, explainability, digital rights, these things that are kind of key pillars that we're seeing, emerge as priorities in the private sector, but also reflected in government priorities. We know, and other panelists have mentioned, that President Trump is addressing, critical need for digital infrastructure to support the energy demands of the technology evolution, and especially technologies like AI. So I think, again, public-private partnerships are going to play a really key role here in the US with Project Stargate and others. But, for this to have international support and be replicated in, countries in the global south, and also, the challenge that we will face with the exacerbation of the digital divide as this development continues to grow exponentially, right? I think India is primed to take advantage of addressing how to fill this digital divide, this gap that exists, having built really successful scale models in the country around, AI ecosystem, innovation development, skills development, workforce development. And so I think India will be a really critical partner to the US if it can, showcase its success in these places. So I think there's quite a few opportunities, and I won't take any more time up since I know we're wrapping up.
All right, so last question for Caroline and Vinay. It's from one of our audience. And the question says that, what are your views on Donald Trump's tariff threats on BRICS countries for moving away from the US dollar?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's going to happen, moving away from the US dollar. So I think those are the threats we have to worry probably the least about of all his threats, because there's, as I said before, there's just no alternative to the dollar. What are you going to use? You need a currency that can easily be converted, where capital can move in and out of the country. And I just don't see an alternative to the dollar right now.
Yeah, Caroline's exactly right. I don't have much to add except to an earlier point on kind of the rules-based order. Executive orders, executive actions are fine, but they're all interpreted by Congress. So legislative bodies is really what moves the needle, and they don't move fast. So stability will be there to back that up.
All right, so with this, I will end this session. It was really a scintillating session, and I hope all those people who attended this as audience, as well as those who would be listening to its recordings later on, they will benefit from the expert views that we managed to present over here with regards to various intricate issues between that all the policymakers in India, US, as well as businesses will have to navigate. Thank you very much, Davinder, Caroline, Akanksha, Vinay, Nadir, I would also like to thank other panelists who are no longer with us at the moment, Mr. Vivek Lall, Neal, and Gopal. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
It has created 4-5 versions of Gopal.